Crypto can help decentralize the power structures that are emerging in AI.
Chris always talks about, like, do you want to be the indie band or do you want to play like the Super Bowl or the mega stadium? And I think like stablecoins really have the ability to appeal to like a much broader audience.
So there's something like $16 trillion in volume on stablecoins per year.
I actually think it's a great time for folks to be building token networks.
Crypto is like a fundamentally radical set of technologies that is very, very hard for incumbent players to adopt and run with, precisely because it is so fundamentally disruptive to the way that they do things.
Yahya Arianna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I'm excited to do a deep dive with you on where we're at right now today in the space. So crypto is a space where people have long been excited about the vision and the potential, and people have long also been skeptical about where the use cases, what's happening, what's actually working. So here we are in May 2025. Why don't you give some context on what's actually worked so far, or what's working right now? Maybe Ollie, why don't you start off?
Sure, happy to. So actually, it's quite interesting because if you go back all the way to 2009 when the original Bitcoin white paper was published, the first line, or is one of the first few lines of the paper, describes Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, a payment system, which was kind of the original vision behind what a blockchain could do. And it's really taken us like 15, 16 years to get to a point where the technology is mature enough to actually make that a reality.
Yeah.
And this is now manifesting with stablecoins. So some of the big issues that Bitcoin had that made it impossible for Bitcoin to become that peer-to-peer electronic payment system is that, one, it was extremely inefficient and very slow, and it still is, and therefore that it's become more of a store of value type of system as opposed to stablecoins. And two, Bitcoin is not a stable unit of account, and so it's very hard to use it for payments. And so since then, one of the big things that has happened is that the infrastructure has matured tremendously to the point at which now we are at a level where a transaction of any amount of money can be done for less than a penny in cost, and it can be done in under a second, roughly. Like those numbers are kind of approximate. Which finally makes something like a peer-to-peer transaction of a few dollars viable on the blockchain. And that, combined with the kind of the regulatory clarity that we're having now as of the new administration, makes stablecoins something that are really beginning to happen. So that's maybe like the biggest thing that's going on in the crypto world at the moment is that stablecoins are beginning to really gain traction. So there's something like $16 trillion in volume on stablecoins per year. And there are many traditional financial institutions that are beginning to use stablecoins to rip out a lot of the kind of the back end of their financial systems. And these are like fintech companies, think Stripe, think Revolut, think Robinhood. Some of the companies in the traditional financial system that rely heavily on the trad financial system are now realizing that stablecoins are a much better way to do things. So that's kind of like the biggest thing that's going on. And we believe that that'll likely lead to this cascading sort of trend of adoption, because once stablecoins become a more kind of mainstay of the way that the financial system works, that opens the door for a lot of the other more advanced and futuristic ideas that crypto has introduced, like DeFi, to begin to also gain adoption. And I think that as a result will lead to kind of all of the other things that we believe crypto can offer to really start to ramp up.
One interesting thing, though, is that stablecoins, at least us who are in the industry full time, have been thinking about for like years and years, because I remember talking about them in like 2017, 2018. And I think there was always kind of a narrative about them being useful for remittances or in countries that have had hyperinflation. And, for those countries, Bitcoin is a better store of value than their native currencies because sometimes it goes up, unlike those which only go down. But it's not ideal because, again, as Ali mentioned, it's not a stable unit of account. And so it's interesting to see that, even though this has been talked about for years, now it's sort of really having its moment. And I think, to Ali's point, a big part of why that's happening is because the infrastructure has evolved to a point where you can now efficiently move money, and you're not having to spend, a huge amount of money to move the money, among other things. So I think that's why we're sort of starting to really see it shine now. Yeah. I would also add that it's sort of intersecting in interesting ways. We're still super early in this, but there's obviously a lot of talk about AI and agents. And if you want to dispatch your agent to go transact on your behalf, you can't really give them your bank account or your credit card, but instead you can give them your crypto wallet. And so kind of this interplay of agents buying or spending money on behalf of their users with stablecoins is a really interesting theme that we're sort of starting to explore.
To that point, it's kind of ridiculous to think about the way that the financial system works today, where even a normal sort of local, like domestic financial transaction where you go to like a coffee shop and you buy a coffee with a credit card, that transaction involves like the point of sale, the payment processor, the issuing bank, the acquiring bank, the credit card network, and each of these intermediaries takes some cut, some fee on the transaction to add up to something like multiple percentage points on the transaction. And that is the case in a domestic transaction. And if the transaction happens to be international, then that entire stack of participants and intermediaries gets duplicated and mirrored on the other side, to the point that kind of any kind of financial transaction across borders is kind of insane in terms of its inefficiency. It can take up to like 3 to 7 days to move money from one country to another, and it can cost like up to 10% of the transaction to do it. So when you have a technology that can now, again, move an arbitrary amount of money from anywhere in the world to any other place in the world for under a penny and under a second, that truly is very transformative, and it'll be very kind of disruptive to the way that the financial system works. So to Arianna's point about AI agents, it's kind of inconceivable that then a human may want to participate in the financial system would have to kind of go through all of that inefficiency and deal with all of these arcane human intermediaries, some of which are not even really automated. That's inconceivable, and the only real way to bring online millions or potentially billions or more AI agents into the kind of the financial system is through a technology that's fully based on software and as efficient as like the crypto rails that are now available and now can be used.
So say more about some of the use cases that stablecoins are currently enabling. Is it mostly on an institutional level? Is it on a consumer level? Or what are sort of the common interactions people are having with stablecoins right now?
I think it's both. It depends sort of what markets you're talking about. There's a company in our current accelerator batch called ZarPay, which is operating in Pakistan, and they're basically creating a network of small, the little shops, if you've been to Africa or wherever, they have these little sort of mobile kiosks where you can put money on your phone and that sort of stuff. And so they're basically using that network in order to create a way for people to come in and deposit their local currency and get stablecoins. And then they're building a whole suite of like financial services around this kind of as the atomic unit. And I think a lot of countries that have, unstable currencies or other financial issues for which holding dollars or the equivalent of dollars in stablecoins is very appealing, immediately understand the value of this and are very attracted to using it. So I think, it goes from that all the way through to banks and financial institutions. I think in many cases there's been an interest in crypto and some of the banks and financial institutions have wanted to get involved, but it's been very unclear how they could do it, largely in part of the regulatory largely as a result of the lack of regulatory clarity, but also because, crypto can be a little scary or whatever. And so it hasn't always been obvious for them to see a path. How do we get involved? What's the way that we can, bring this to our consumers? And so stablecoins, I think, are kind of like a baby step in the sense that it's a lot more clear what the value proposition is. It's a non-speculative use case. And so I think it's just a good entry point for some of these larger institutions.
Ali, why don't you give a brief overview or help us understand better sort of the stablecoin landscape around like what big companies or types of companies have emerged or will emerge as a result of it, or what it means for or how it impacts the crypto startup ecosystem more broadly?
Right now, like the at the center of all of the action are the stablecoin issuers. Yeah. So we've got like two of the major ones right now are USDC, which is created by this consortium between Coinbase and Circle, and then there's Tether. And so both of these are like the kind of the biggest two issuers of stablecoins today. Then, of course, both of these stablecoins operate on top of blockchains. So another important piece of the stack is the infrastructure on top of which some of these stablecoins operate on. And then you have like this kind of sort of a collection of companies at the periphery that are generally just companies that help connect the crypto world to the external world. And that would include wallets. It would include like some of the kind of fintech companies that are using blockchain technology as the back end, but have a front end that it looks more like a Web 2 type of front end, and doesn't expose the crypto aspects to the end user as much. And all of those players will be a part of the story as well. So one of the things that we talk a ton about is like what will this stack look like end to end as the space evolves. And one of the exciting things that we are hoping will happen soon is we'll get legislation that sets the rules of the road for stablecoins and for what is required for an issuer to create a stablecoin, what kind of collateral is needed for the stablecoin to be compliant. We strongly believe it'll likely happen this year. It'll to some extent commoditize the issuance layer because it'll be easier for new issuers to emerge and create their own stablecoins that are also USD denominated, to the point that those new stablecoins are somewhat fungible and interchangeable with USDC and with Tether. Because if all of them are compliant, then you kind of can trust that all of them are likely to be ultimately redeemable for $1 and they're equally trustworthy, which means that then the issuers may no longer be the ones that capture all the value the way that they do now. And instead, a lot of the value might be captured by some of the other layers. Like, for example, the infrastructure is likely to capture a lot of the value because a lot of the activity, a lot of these sort of transactions, stablecoin transactions that are happen on blockchains like Solana, Ethereum, Sui, a number of other kind of important layer 1 blockchains. And all of those require payment of gas for all of those transactions. So those blockchains are likely to be important players in kind of like the way that this unfolds. And then I think the other, like that's on one end of the stack, and then the other end will be kind of the endpoint, like the user, the interface that connects this whole crypto world to the end user. So wallets will be likely important. One of our portfolio companies, Phantom, likely be well positioned as a gateway or an interface for people to interact with stablecoins and get kind of exposure to US dollars, regardless of where they may be. So that's maybe a bit of a layout for what the ecosystem looks like at the moment.
It seems like for years there's been this question of, hey, what's going to make it so that there's hundreds of millions of users, or I'm not sure what it is at the moment across all of crypto, or a billion users. Or they asked before that, kind of what's the iPhone moment? What's sort of the product that everyone's going to be using that's also a platform for everything? Is it stablecoins, or is it something else? Or how do we think about that?
I mean, I think the odds are good that stablecoins are that thing. I also don't think that necessarily there needs to be one thing. I think, we mentioned AI. Ali has made some investments in that category. We've done some as a team. I think there's going to be different waves that bring in different users. A while ago, Web3 games was a big entry point. Now it's AI and stablecoins. So I think, the users do come in waves. I think there's a lot of it that sort of tracks the cycles that, we see every couple of years in crypto. Chris always talks about, like, do you want to be the indie band or do you want to play like the Super Bowl or the mega stadium? And I think like stablecoins really have the ability to appeal to like a much broader audience because, like we said, it's just a use case that makes sense. It's pretty clear what the value proposition is. And so it appeals to a broader audience.
Yeah, in part also because it addresses a very real pain point. Whether it be for people in third world countries that want exposure to the dollar because their local currency may not be as reliable, or people who want to move money between borders, and we talked about how that can be extremely inefficient, or even companies that want to move money across borders. They still have to deal with all the inefficiency, and stablecoins are actually, like apparently companies like SpaceX are already using stablecoins for treasury management to move money from like one country to another in a way that's much more efficient than using the
I believe they were using Bridge, which Stripe now acquired. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Stripe Sessions, their big conference was like all about stablecoins. Like so many of the talk tracks last week were about that. And so I think it's really indicative of the fact that this is kind of permeating not just crypto companies, but out more broadly. And I think obviously the other necessary element in addition to the infrastructure improvements and all of that is just the fact that now we have a more friendly regulatory regime, which is interested in seeing these kinds of things flourish.
One thing I've always appreciated about crypto investing is you guys as domain experts don't just need to understand the technology, which is complex enough in itself, but you also need to understand sort of the policy regime, law, monetary policy, economics, foreign policy, and how all these things are sort of intersecting with crypto startups.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not the domain expert on some of the policy stuff, but we've really assembled a super strong team who's been kind of very involved in DC and trying to kind of push the ball forward for the whole industry.
You mentioned Stripe getting deeply involved in crypto. It's interesting because people often contrast it with AI and say, hey, AI is mostly sustaining innovation. And that, of course, there's massive companies that have been sort of formed, but a lot of the gains have gone to the biggest companies, whereas crypto is mostly a startup innovation, though some bigger companies are getting involved too. It's funny, like maybe Facebook was just a few years too early with if they launched Libra in a more friendly regime, might that have worked? How do you think about sort of the startup versus incumbent distinction in this space?
Yeah, crypto is like a fundamentally radical set of technologies that is very, very hard for incumbent players to adopt and run with, precisely because it is so fundamentally disruptive to the way that they do things. I was at Google a while back. I was at Google X working on a robotics project, but I was already very interested in crypto. And Google X is supposed to be like the moonshot factory, and it's supposed to be super innovative and open to new ideas, open to start new companies.
But they don't want it.
New ideas. I tried to get Google X to.
I tried at Facebook, by the way, same thing.
And it's like Google would not touch crypto with a 1,000-foot pole unless it was like a very, very kind of vanilla, like we will like run some like node or whatever.
Were they like, this makes no sense, or were they like, it's evil, or like this?
I think they kind of fundamentally didn't get it. They were afraid about the optics. They were afraid about the regulatory association with it, the reputational consequences. Also, like the whole Web3 vision, the vision of decentralizing web services, which is, I think, the kind of the most futuristic vision for crypto, is fundamentally disruptive to the way that these companies work. Like these are centralized companies that make money and have power precisely by virtue of being so centralized.
Yeah.
And if you build something like a social network that is fully decentralized and has no core central company, like no monopolistic tech giant that's worth $44 billion that controls what recommendation algorithm is used and who gets to follow whom and all of the data and the social graph itself, then that company no longer has a business model.
Right.
It's a very, very different business model to build a social network that's decentralized in the way that a company like Farcaster currently is. And so for a company like, say, Facebook or Google in its own way to decentralize itself and to truly embrace crypto with arms wide open, it would have to kind of cannibalize its own business model. And I think that's actually becoming true for AI as well. Like I think that it was very, very true that AI was a very sustaining innovation before, but it's gotten so powerful that there are many elements of it that are disruptive. Like if Google wanted to really embrace AI, it would have to replace search.
Exactly.
With an AI, with an LLM instead of having its current model. And of course, that's a hard thing for it to do given that kind of the insanely profitable business model that they currently have.
Yeah.
Is that still the vision that we'll have decentralized social networks, decentralized marketplace, or kind of where are we on that vision, and what are the bottlenecks to that vision being realized? Sort of, networks at scale that are truly decentralized and competing with some of the centralized ones. Is it technological, or is it that people just don't really care about sort of this in the same way, or like why hasn't it happened yet?
I think it's mostly a consumer preference issue. I do think like now some of the products have gotten really good, like Farcaster, for example. The product experience is very good, but it's just challenging to get people to switch because the reason you're on the social network is for the graph, and so it's difficult to kind of export an entire graph. I think like users are kind of accustomed to being the product. Like, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And I think in many cases, consumers are kind of used to that experience. And, ads are annoying, but they're not necessarily that bad. And so people just kind of accept it and don't think too much about it. And by the way, this is interesting because if you look at like all of the big social networks, none of them have been started in the last decade. And that's not true just of crypto. It's true in general. And so it's just very difficult, I think, to kind of get over this hurdle of like, reaching a critical mass whereby people actually say, oh, I'm in the network and I'm going to stay in the network. So it's not just a crypto thing. I think it's just difficult nowadays. People only have so much attention, and with the networks that there are, most of the attention span has already been captured. So I think we may need to see some of the existing ones falter before there's like enough room for some of the new ones to really take hold. But we'll see.
Yeah, we used to believe that these ideas and these companies would be the first to gain adoption. And that was largely because all of the financial use cases, like the DeFi use cases, even like the stablecoin use cases, were illegal. Yeah. As was the case in the previous administration. And so it felt to us like the more kind of innocuous seeming social network use cases, gaming use cases would more likely gain adoption. And then that will be the gateway for other things to eventually become legitimate and get acceptance from a regulatory standpoint. But now that the regulatory landscape has shifted so much to the point at which it's now a much more friendly landscape. And as a result, we have like all these traditional financial institutions getting involved, and stablecoins are really having a moment, combined with the kind of the infrastructure clicking into place. It's now much more clear that the more financial use cases are likely to happen first. Those will act as a legitimizing force for the rest of the space. And then the consumer use cases, which we still believe in, will take longer. And I think, as Arianna is saying, it's very, very hard to get those things right. Like the bar that a consumer has on the quality of a consumer-facing application is extremely high. Mm-hmm. And crypto has not yet figured out all of the UX challenges, and like the kind of the seamlessness and usability challenges of crypto are still a nascent technology on that front. So it'll take longer for all of those things to get resolved. But in the meantime, we have all these other financial use cases, which I think will kind of solidify the technology, will legitimize the space for a broader group of people, will get more entrepreneurs to come into the space.
Right.
But yeah, I think on the point of the attention span or lack thereof of consumers, it's interesting when you see kind of a new network created around an area that doesn't already have somebody in the non-Web3 world occupying it. So for example, I think a good example of this is Blackbird, which is kind of a network for restaurant lovers. And you can think about it as Amex points for restaurants. And they're occupying a space that nobody really owns it right now. Like the credit card companies kind of do, but it's still sort of a so-so experience at best. And when you have a great entrepreneur who is really deep in restaurant tech, like Ben Leventhal, who's the founder, tackling a problem like that, bringing a kind of consumer Web 2 experience, but using Web 3, therefore allowing the restaurants and the consumers to actually have ownership in this network, which wouldn't be possible in a Web 2 context, then it's pretty interesting, because that's something that, you couldn't really give the same ownership. And if you look at some of the platforms like Uber Eats or DoorDash, the restaurants kind of have to work with them because their margins are so slim. And so they kind of need as much volume as they can, basically. But it's not great because the platforms are in many cases quite extractive and dig deeper into the margins of the restaurants. And so if you are using stablecoin payments to bring down transaction costs, and you're also giving restaurants actual ownership in the network, therefore helping their bottom line in that way too, it's really interesting.
Ali, let's go a bit deeper on sort of AI and the intersection between AI and crypto. What's working there, or where are you most excited?
Peter Thiel actually had this tongue-in-cheek line back in 2018, which I think rings true, which is that AI is communist and crypto is libertarian, which I think is it actually like the kind of the meta point is that these two technologies are very different from one another, and in many ways they're actually counterweights for each other. So there are many ways in which they are intersecting, and we can talk through a few of them. Yeah. I think one of the most important ways is that AI is creating a kind of overabundance of media and of human-looking entities, agents that can pretend to be human, or deep fakes of video or audio that seems very human, and it's hard to know whether you're looking at something that's real or something that's purely generated. And crypto happens to be a really good technology to help authenticate media or help authenticate data in general. One of the ways in which these two worlds will collide is that there are crypto projects that are working on, among many other things, proof of humanity, which would allow anyone, a user on the internet, to prove that they actually are human, so that anyone on the other end can know that they're interacting with a human and not with an AI bot or an AI agent. WorldCoin is one of these companies, is one of our portfolio companies, and they built an orb that uses biometric information and also uses zero-knowledge proofs to keep all of the biometric data private. In fact, like the data itself never leaves the orb, and only a code or a cryptographic object that is derived from the biometric data ever leaves the orb. And from that cryptographic object, that is not possible to infer anything about the biometric data itself. And it's a technology that allows anyone to prove their humanity on the internet. There was that famous line in the 90s that on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog.
Yeah.
And that is very, very true now in 2025, where like on the internet, nobody knows you're human. Like it could be anything. You could be
a dog or an agent.
A dog or an agent.
Else. Yeah.
So that's one way. I think that cryptography, blockchains will help kind of deal with the immensity and of abundance of signal and noise that AI will generate. Another big one is that crypto can help decentralize the power structures that are emerging in AI. At the moment, it seems like there will be a small number of very, very powerful players in the AI world. It's looking like, even though it's unclear as to whether there are things like network effects that drive defensibility, there are just a handful of really powerful players in the space, at least at the kind of the model layer, like OpenAI and the other kind of big companies that build foundation models. Crypto offers an alternative for creating AI systems that's more decentralized. So an example of this is a company called Jensen, which is also in our portfolio, that builds a kind of marketplace for compute. So someone on one side of the marketplace can provide their idle GPU capacity to the network, and then someone on the other side who might want to use the GPU compute for training a model or for doing inference on a model can through the network make use of all of that compute. And the network manages all of these heterogeneous computational resources to create something that feels like a unified cloud on which you can run all of these machine learning AI workloads in a way that's fully decentralized, in a way that is not kind of controlled by a single company, and in a way that could actually be more efficient than a cloud by virtue of using capacity that otherwise would just go idle and unused. It's just capacity that's locked away in all of these like pockets that are far removed and not in one particular data center. There are many hard technical challenges to get there, but there are a lot of smart people working toward figuring that out, and we're kind of very optimistic that'll also happen. It'll also allow for machine learning workloads to run in a way that is also verifiable. So this way you don't have to trust a centralized company like Facebook or like one of the kind of the social media companies, that the machine learning model, that the AI model that they're running for say like the recommendation algorithm is unbiased or has particular properties. You can actually, with cryptography, verify that those things are the case and that these things are executed in a way that's correct. You can use some of these decentralized systems for that as well. And then maybe the final one, which I think is the most futuristic and the most challenging, is having crypto help AI figure out the new business models for the internet. So one of the issues that AI will create with the current business models of the internet is that right now, the way that the internet works is that you have an aggregator, like a search engine, driving traffic to creators of media, like say someone who has written a blog post or someone who has like a page that has content. And there's ads as like the business model that mediates that whole interaction. And that entire business model goes away if you just have an AI that just gives you the answer that you're looking for. So instead of doing search on Google, getting exposed to a bunch of ads and then clicking through to a website and having all of those parties kind of be happy because kind of the business model includes all of them. Now, instead of that, you just interact with an LLM and you get the answer immediately, and you never click through to the final page, and you never get exposed to an ad. That kind of completely changes the way that the internet works. And we're going to need new business models for the internet if that's the case. So one idea is that you could through there are a lot of these research efforts to try to figure out attribution in the training of a machine learning model for what pieces of data contributed to a particular output. So if you're asking an LLM a question, you kind of want to know what pieces of data that were used to train that LLM contributed to the answer that the LLM ultimately gives you when you ask it a question. And if you could know that, then you could come up with a business model that rewards the people who contributed that data originally. And crypto could be part of that. So there are open problems on both sides. Like you have to figure out this attribution challenge in the AI world, and there are people working on that problem. And then there's a challenge on the crypto side, like how do you build a network that can, using that information, compensate all of the parties involved in having the AI actually give you what you ultimately want.
Fascinating. Are the big labs interested in crypto? Do they need to be interested in crypto for this to happen? Or is this largely coming from startups? You know, it's funny, Sam Altman, of course, OpenAI, but also WorldCoin. So it has some familiarity. But what can you say about this?
For the most part, I don't think so. I think for the most part, the AI labs, they're just running with AI, and there's so much that's exciting in that world that I think crypto doesn't really factor in at all. But there are crypto companies that are very interested in AI and are thinking about the ways in which crypto will ultimately make a difference in that world. So like this company I mentioned, Jensen, actually the founders are very, very deep in AI. They have an AI background, but they also happen to have like a deep commitment to building things as open source networks that are ultimately decentralized. And so they are of the few people who really do straddle both worlds.
Zooming out a little bit, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you think people have about the space right now? Maybe Arianna, starting with you.
Well, I mean, I think for the last few years, it's been really challenging to launch a token network in the United States in particular, because there was a lack of clear legislation. And then there were very aggressive folks in several agencies, working on basically not allowing entrepreneurs to launch networks. And that applied to entrepreneurs who were very well-meaning and very much wanted to do things by the books. And so I think one of the challenges was that people obviously didn't want to end up in legal trouble, and therefore, in many cases, kind of pulled back their plans on that front, which really impeded their progress on the product side as well. So they couldn't really build their vision because I think tokens are part and parcel of what's valuable and interesting about crypto. And so if you remove that piece, it doesn't make any sense. So the thing that's a misconception, perhaps, is that the situation is very different now. We have a much friendlier administration in place. We have a very different situation in terms of the leadership of these agencies now. And so I actually think it's a great time for folks to be building token networks. And I think that message hasn't necessarily fully made it out there. So I'm hopeful that, more entrepreneurs kind of realize that the situation is, again, very different from what it was just a few months ago and start to kind of come back in force.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think another big one is outside of like our immediate circles, like if you go outside of the world of tech, it's shocking to me that people continue to think of crypto as just like a thing that's supposed to be money only, or they think of a blockchain as a kind of ledger for money. And I think that misconception comes from Bitcoin, Bitcoin trying to be money and only money, and not really trying to be anything else. And the fact that like this misconception is that like Ethereum is like Bitcoin, and Ethereum is actually the silver to Bitcoin's gold. And that all that crypto really is just another kind of attempt to doing what Bitcoin did. And the fact that Ethereum actually is a fundamentally different thing than Bitcoin is still not widely understood. The fact that Ethereum is actually a kind of computer where you can build all sorts of different applications, where the software that runs on top of the computer has unique properties that no other software has ever had, is I think not widely understood. And these are programs that, like the programs that run on a blockchain like Ethereum are programs that have a life of their own. They are programs that can make commitments that no one has to trust anyone to believe in. It's essentially free from interference from anyone, including the people who originally wrote the program. And so that's a very unique property that no other kind of software has. It's a kind of technology that inverts the power relationship between the software and the hardware. Whereas historically, the hardware has always had power over the software because whomever controls the hardware can turn off the software or change it in some way. Whereas in crypto with blockchains, the hardware is a commodity. These are people who run, like the miners, for example, or validators in the blockchain context don't have any power over the software that runs on top. And that's what makes a blockchain unique. And that's what makes it capable of doing so much more than just money. You can kind of build far more sophisticated primitives. So stable coins are the first thing, but the things that come after, things like DeFi, where you can build much more sophisticated financial primitives on chain, or some of these other more futuristic ideas where you can do AI, you can do deepen, you can do some of these consumer-facing applications like decentralized social networks. All of that relies on the properties of a blockchain computer. That's not just a ledger, it's a full-on computer on which you can build applications. That, I think, is not something that most people really get.
Maybe, Ali, can you give a bit of an update on kind of the smart contract platform wars as an outsider or someone who's paid attention, at certain times and not at certain times? What I've sort of heard or gleaned is, hey, Bitcoin, as you mentioned, has tried to be money, but there's a little bit of a nascent Bitcoin builder movement. I'm not sure if they've really, if that's led to something particularly meaningful in the space. And then my understanding is that Ethereum has tried to sort of optimize across multiple dimensions, both trying to be money, but also trying to be sort of the base layer for sort of decentralized internet, and committed to decentralization in a way that some people think is at the sacrifice of usability, whereas Solana has not had the same commitments to decentralization, is really optimized for usability. One, is that a fair characterization? How would you edit the characterization? And two, how is this all played out, or where are we right now on that level?
Yeah, that's actually a really good characterization. I think the way that I would break things down is that there is a very large and multidimensional trade-off space, and it's very hard for any one system to cover the entire space. So it makes sense that you'd end up with different systems specialized for different things, and then as a result, having different use cases and different value propositions. So Bitcoin, I think, has been extremely successful at becoming like a kind of digital gold. Yeah. It's been extremely volatile, but I think that there is this belief, there's mimetic value that Bitcoin is long-term a pretty good store of value that will be around for a very, very long time. It's not going anywhere, and will have properties that are desirable, that are not provided by other things like fiat or like gold itself or anything.
It's funny, it's only been around for less than 20 years, but in my head, I sort of treat it as gold. It's like going to be there forever. And
Exactly. So it's really succeeded at that, and I think some of the things that has helped it succeed at that is the fact that it is so hard to change, and the fact that it is so simple and you can't do that much with it. Those things are disadvantages in some contexts, but they're real advantages when trying to solve for that particular thing. Then there are like all the other smart contract platforms that are trying to do much more and are trying to be computers. And Ethereum lands in some part of the trade-off space here where they do really optimize for decentralization, and they are fully decentralized. And so it's hard for Ethereum to change quickly because there are a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people who want to be able to influence its direction. And so the choices that it has made have made it a pretty good platform for some of the kind of the higher stakes like DeFi applications, or for the issuance, for example, issuance of new assets on Ethereum. That might be the default simply because it's been around the longest and its high amount of decentralization make it very suitable for that. And then there are blockchains like, say, Solana and Sui, which are extremely high performance. They're very well suited for transactions and for payments and for things that do require that level of performance. If you wanted to build something like the NASDAQ exchange on chain, there's no way you're doing that on Ethereum L1. You probably need a blockchain that has the kind of the level of performance that a Solana or a Sui or some of the other kind of more modern or more recent blockchains have. So I think I expect that each of these ecosystems will likely find their niche. It's obviously very uncertain, and there's all this talk about how maybe Solana will kind of eat Ethereum's lunch, and that's a possibility.
But it's still wide open, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, it's wide open, and there's like a lot of ways in which it can play out.
Yeah. So, Arianna, I want to double click on your point about the misconception in terms of how the policy regime has changed.
If you look at the Novi, Libra, it had 7 different names. So whichever one you want to use, that was something that could have been incredibly interesting because you have, Facebook now Meta, with such an enormous distribution network, already has all the users. Integrating payments into that via crypto made all the sense in the world. But obviously they were told in no uncertain terms that was not something that they could proceed with. And then unfortunately, the whole project kind of died. I will say it went on to flourish in other forms because, we're investors in Misson and Sui. Yeah, they spun out of there. So there have been actually a number of great teams who came from there. So I think the diaspora of talent has continued to kind of fight the good fight and build. But in general, that's another project that I think sort of, as it was initially conceived, had to die on the vine because of that. So yeah, it's I think as investors, it's not necessarily our job to envision like what is possible, but rather to recognize it when we see it. And so I'm personally very excited to see what entrepreneurs come up with in the next couple of years now that we have kind of a new opportunity space.